Hello? Are you hello? Are you there?
Can you hear us now?
Hello?
Yes, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Right.
I can see you. Can you see me?
Yes.
Oh, good grief. Okay.
First one, you gotta go down to L3, L3, and go all the way back to. No, L3, it's the bottom part. Looks like a fridge. It does. We have to think about that.
Can we just leave this stuff here when we're finished?
I'll sign this.
You
Oh,
said you
I'll be
waited
on
a
that,
couple
yeah.
of minutes? Who's Elizabeth? I'm just wondering, what do you do to advertise pre-law? Because I literally have people ask me to write them recommendations for law school. And they have bizarre ideas, like they're gonna get into Columbia when they've got a 2.6.
Sure.
And I said, have you been attending the pre-law institute? Because they might be able to guide you into the schools that are more realistic. Pre-law institute. So
We hear that too often, yeah. Well, let me, so you can email me, but let me get your, do you have a card or a way that I can?
no, I'm an adjunct. We don't have offices or anything. So-
Okay, well, I'll get your email address before we leave.
I mean, if I thought that they were interested, I would tell them in advance, but this is like 2 years after I had them.
Yeah, no, I
No,
really.
and I'm like trying to gently say, listen, I was like a 4.0 and I couldn't get into Columbia. So, I mean, it's nice to have dreams, but let's start talking about law and 4.0 and stuff. I
That's
said, I
exactly
went to
what we
St. John's, there's no problem with things like that, but this is not gonna get you into Columbia. Oh, but I think I can, so I don't know.
Right.
I think they need to be involved with other people that are talking about, who got in where last year and stuff like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's surprising because there's such a big population of pre-law students here at John Jay that you expect them to find each other with the pre-meds because there's only 5 that actually apply. There's like 50, but there's only 5 that actually go through the process. Getting them in a room is so hard.
Yeah, I mean, we send so many emails, but the email boxes are already full. That's what everybody says. The email boxes are clogged. We speak at all of the events, orientation events, and
Probably in orientation and not thinking that,
yeah,
so.
they sign later on.
And they,
when you come
it's
across
not that their
them,
email box is full, they don't look at them, they only text. So all the emails that get sent out in conjunction with the announcements from Blackboard, they never see them, they go, oh, I guess it's not working. No, you don't check.
Right.
Yeah,
You're like allergic.
And the graduate studies just put together a little brochure with all of the student services that I'm hoping they're actually, they have the money to put them and give it to them. Because there are only 10% of our students end up under a program cohort or anything. That's only 1,500.
Right, and they better graduating in 4 years.
The other half, we don't know, is it that we're not reaching them or they don't care, or they don't look for it.
Okay, I didn't mean to delay you, I just.
Oh, no, this is the point of this. So just since we're early and there's only 3 of us, or there's only 3 of you and 2 of us, how about we just go around the room and say who we are, so that I know? So how about we start with our personal line? Can you say your name and what department you're with?
Unfortunately, the audio is not very clear.
Okay, let me move closer to, can you hear me better now?
Not very much. It's a bit garbled.
Okay,
Let me adjust my volume. And if worse comes to worse, I'll catch what I can.
okay. So how about then?
Sure. I'm Lisa Sway, and I'm from the psychology department.
And I'm Bernadette Ford from One Police Science. So this is the end of my 4th year as an adjunct teaching.
Nice to meet you all. So I'm Elizabeth Broccoli. I'm the Associate Director of the Freelaw Institute and Center for Postgraduate Opportunities. So,
I'm Edgardo Sanabria Valentin. I'm the Associate Director of PRISM in the Science Department, and I'm also the pre-health advisor for the college at large, and an adjunct professor of biology. Okay, so the reason we, Elizabeth and I got together to start working on this presentation that we do generally once a year in every faculty development day is because about 4 years ago, I got a phone call from the dean at a graduate school that I know, that one of our students had applied, and the student, the record was good enough to be considered, but he got a letter of recommendation from a faculty member that made no sense. There was no clear indication that this person that wrote the letter of recommendation was the right person to write it. Our readers could tell that they don't know the student. So we started working, trying to figure out, because we know that the biggest group in the college that go to for postgraduate education in professional schools are the pre-law students. We started working together on trying to figure out a way on how to give an opportunity to faculty to discuss not just what makes a letter of recommendation, but also when to figure out if you're the right recommender for a student. So, wrong computer.
No, I was thinking the same thing. Yeah, I'll help you.
Okay, so we're going to go briefly over what is a letter of recommendation in general. For this, we refer to graduate schools or postgraduate programs in general. This also applies to internships or any other mostly academic endeavor that's on that side of academia. Both going over how to prepare the structure of the letters and what not to do on a letter. And then we're going to open the floor for discussion. We want to hear from you about questions you might have. And then we're going to talk briefly about the particularities of the two letters of, letters of recommendation for students going to postgraduate programs in medicine or health or law.
And please feel free to jump in and ask questions.
Hello. So a letter of recommendation, the way I see it, is my opportunity to pass on the torch to the next generation. Way for me to inform other of my colleagues that are in charge of recruiting and finding the students that are going to continue on their path in academia towards a master's or graduate degree, a way for me to also contribute to make sure that our deserving students get the same first foot on to graduate programs, to the good graduate programs that students in any others potentially more recognized. And they're very important during the admission process because they're an opportunity for the admissions committee to meet the candidates outside of the narrative that the scores of tests or GPA gives, that's only numbers, or the narrative that the student gives about themselves through personal statements. It's also, they are very important, particularly for in the medical school application and also in graduate school for biomedical sciences. Very important because it gives the opinion of a colleague. As someone that has done this before, I can tell you the student has what it takes. And it's also a way for you guys to establish yourselves as a mentor. Having a good track record with graduate programs or postgraduate programs that I send you, all the students that I've sent to this school have perform well, that means that your letter will have more value, will also contribute to the value and to the knowledge about the quality of students that we produce here at John. It's also very part of our job. It's not something that it's not an additional thing that we have to do on the side. It's not a favor that we have to do. It is part of our jobs in academia, because if not us, who would write them? And finally, they're not exactly, they're not an Excel short, and also it's not a template form. There's no particularly one rule or one format. This is not a pro format type of document that you do, although there are good guidelines on how to structure them and what to talk about and how to talk about that. So although most letters of recommendation will follow the same pattern, there are going to be differences depending on the type of program that they do, that the student is applying to. Graduate schools, because in graduate school, what you do is learn more in depth about a subject and do research. The letter of recommendation should touch both on their academic performance and any research experience the student might have. For professional school, law school, medical school, in that might go a little bit outside of your comfort level, but not really. At the end, you can then use your evaluation of the student to basically say, if I was a patient, I would trust this student. If I was in search of a lawyer, I would be privileged to have this former student be the person representing. And also describe the characteristics that you would like on a good lawyer, a good physician, or a good psychologist. How does your student have those competencies? How does your student have those qualities, and why would they make an amazing whatever it is that they're becoming? Then there's the letters for scholarship, fellowships, and internships. That again depends on the purpose of the scholarship. The best way to figure out is to, now everything has a web page. Google the scholarship, Google the internship, and they'll have a description of what the internship has. You can use that to guide you over what to write about. If the internship is for the student to learn more hands-on experience on your field, you can talk in your letter of recommendation about the qualities that you've seen the student has that will make them great, or the need for the student to acquire those skills that potentially maybe cannot provide them here at John. Finally, there's a letter of reference for the job market. We're not going to touch upon that, although we realize that we have never done it, and I think by next year we might work with the Career Center to also cover this, those letters and what particularities they take.
Okay, so how to prepare for a letter of recommendation. So you'll often get an email from a student, or they'll come to you after class, and they'll say, will you write a letter of recommendation for me? Perfectly reasonable to ask for at least 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, it's up to you and your discretion, but if a student says a letter of recommendation is due tomorrow, you certainly don't have to say yes. You should ask them for as much material as you want, that you need. A resume, a personal statement, which is their essay for law school or graduate school, explaining why they want to do that opportunity, their transcript and other relevant material. The one thing I would say avoid asking for is test scores, because students often wait until they get their test scores to apply, and then I wouldn't want that to influence your letter. Meet with the student to discuss their plans and goals. I think that's important. And if you're a little wary of writing the letter, that's a good time to meet with the student and say, I don't know you that well. I'm happy to write the letter for you, but this is what I would say. So they would get a sense of the direction you're headed in. And you can also ask if they want you to highlight anything. Sometimes students have a list of bullet points that they want you to discuss that are not addressed somewhere else in the letter. So meeting with them is helpful. And so it puts you both on the same page. Read the instructions and do your research. Usually every letter wants something a little different. And so you don't want to use a letter that you used for an internship 3 years ago for law school and not edit it, because then whomever's reading it will see that you didn't make that change. And these letters make a huge difference in the application. In my office, we receive scholarship applications and fellowship applications for on-campus opportunities and off-campus opportunities. And we're lucky to read letters of recommendation all the time. And you wouldn't believe how much difference a recommendation makes in the application. If we see a very short paragraph letter of recommendation, we're sort of not swayed by it. But if we see this 2-page, very persuasive, very thoughtful letter of recommendation, it really can often be the deciding factor. Ask colleagues you respect for samples, learn from others. You'll find that everybody has sort of a template that they use, that they adjust a little bit, because in the beginning, you're generally going to introduce yourself. So perfectly fine to ask others for samples that you can review. And we in our offices both have samples, so you can feel free to email us. Our email addresses are listed there. And Ed's he has a sample he's going to show you later. So again, read the directions and make sure that there's not a specific format they want you to follow, but typically this is what you're gonna wanna do. Write it on letterhead, that's important. Sometimes people will submit letters of recommendation without letterhead, and then it's hard to verify their affiliation. So the first paragraph or a few sentences, welcome. You are going to introduce yourself and the candidate. You're basically explaining how you're qualified to write the letter of recommendation. What your position is, how long you've taught at John Jay, how long you've been teaching in general, and then how long you've known the student. So I met the student in this class, we've known each other for a year. Or I met the student 3 years ago, and we've continued to correspond and meet in advisement sessions once a semester. Present the candidate truthfully but positively. So you don't want to rave about this person if you don't know that person that well. So be honest. Give specific examples, show it, don't say it. I'm sure you say that to your students a lot. But if you say this person's a good writer, you might want to say, well, this person wrote this research paper on this topic, and it was one of the best in the class, and grammatically and organizationally, it was very good, and you might say the topic. That will really resonate with the reader, and they'll remember it if you give an example. Rank, compare to previous students, quantify their accomplishments. So schools love to hear this. If the student was in the top 10% of students you've ever taught, if they were in the top 20%, they love to hear this. So please feel free to say that. Address the requirements of the career and how the candidate's personal attributes contribute to the field. So if the candidate is going in your career path, you know it well, and you'll be able to speak to it. If it's in a career path that you're not as familiar with, as Ed said, you have a sense. If the student is going to law school, you know that they want to be a good public speaker, that they want to be a good communicator in writing and orally, so you can discuss that if they have empathy for other people. And certainly, you know, you can just get a sense of other careers as well. Circumstances, obstacles the student has faced, they should not discuss on the personal statement. So that might be something you want to discuss when you meet with the student. Sometimes you don't know our students. Sometimes they left for a semester, maybe to take care of family or an illness, or they had a difficult immigration experience. Everybody has something. They generally don't want to discuss that too much on their personal statement because that's why they want to go into the specific career path. It's not necessarily where they're explaining things. So if you feel like you want to explain something, by all means, you can include it in the letter of recommendation. Just make sure you run it past the student to make sure you're not revealing anything that they don't want you to share. Weaknesses the student has overcome, I think that's similar to the above. So maybe they began with a poor GPA, or maybe when you first met them, they were struggling and then they really overcame and excelled and you really are impressed by their progress. That's a good thing to say because it shows their trajectory. Content and structure. Make it memorable, but not kooky. So that's where you're giving examples. Examples of their work in class, examples, maybe how you see them interact with their peers, maybe times you see them in office hours, maybe you've observed them on campus as a student leader. Beware of what you leave out. And this is where you are maybe being helpful to the student, but anyone reading it will have a sense that you've forgotten something. So let's say somebody is maybe not a good writer, and you don't mention writing at all in your letter, and they're applying for a degree that really uses writing a lot. So if you don't mention that at all, somebody reading it will have a sense. They'll be able to read between the lines. Were you involved in the student's decision of pursuing this career? That's always a good story to tell. So maybe you were instrumental in helping them decide to pursue a career in social work. That is something that the reader really wants to hear. So it could be, we had this conversation in my office, or I heard this person speak about it in class a lot. When and how to discuss personal information. So that's what I mentioned before. Only when the student asks you and you are comfortable with it. So again, if they've overcome a hardship, or if you know that they're a parent, or if you know that they're working 3 jobs or something, make sure that you ask them. Generally, they're comfortable with it, and generally the reader loves to hear this because it helps set the stage for every other material they're reading. But just discuss it with the student, and by showing your willingness to help further. So that could be just a simple thing at the end of the letter saying, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, or I'm happy to answer any other questions you have. Will they call you? Have any of you been called after you submitted a letter of recommendation? They generally don't call. Sometimes they call me. The law schools will call me to clarify something, but generally they won't call. But if they do, you're there as someone to advocate for the student.
Okay, so in general, the structure of the letter should have the contents that we discussed, and this is how I personally structure mine. Everyone's free to do so on whatever format they prefer. But I like to make sure that I have to read a lot of letters of recommendation. The letters of recommendation from medical school generally go through me before they go to the medical school. I get a lot of them. That's just a Word document that's not even signed. I send them back. I'm not sending a letter of recommendation on behalf of John Jay when the person doesn't even bother to download the letterhead to get it on letterhead. It's important. Why? That is how you prove that actually I am what I'm saying that I am. I am part of John Jay. I have these qualifications. On the first part, I generally talk about a little bit about myself. What is it that I do, and why am I the right person to give this recommendation on behalf of the student? And then I talk about how I met when did I meet the candidate, in what capacity, because I have 3 different jobs at John Jay. I try to, in that case, start with the one that I have interacted with the student the most. Then I like to do an example-based narrative. What I do is I think the student is applying to medical school. Physicians need to be not only scientifically literate, but they also have to have good cultural competencies. They have to have good personalities, that they like to work with different people, different from themselves. They also have to have the capacity to have strong analytical skills. So then I provide examples of the qualities that I believe that student has that are important to the profession. In the case of students applying to graduate school in science, I like to I only provide those letters to students that have taken my class so that I can have actual examples, one-on-one interactions. So in that case, I can talk about both the technical aspect of science, but also how they think to a problem. Then I compare the candidates to other peers, or if they're part of PRISM, I can compare them to the cohort of students that are applying to graduate schools that year. If they're to medical school, then I compare them to the relatively small number of students that we have John Jay that end up applying and attending medical school or other healthcare-based professions. If I have the numbers, then I can put the student is on the top 10% of their GPA, but establishing that among all the students that I've worked with, I consider the student to be on the top 5, 10, 15% is good enough, so that you can give them context based on your experience. It's not okay to say that all the students are on your top 1%, because schools might be getting multiple letters from you. If they all say the same, then they're going to think that you're not paying that much attention, and it's going to lose their value. So being honest with that is important, establishing like a mental metric to be able to give the students a comparative subjective score. And finally, offer help. This is pro forma. This is something like just good manners, offer to be open if you have any questions, have any discussions, it just leaves a good flavor at the end of reading. And the one sentence, and it's always good to ask colleagues if you have never done it. Ask, for example, ask colleagues for online. I remember I use now a sentence for students that I'm really invested in, particularly on the science side. I had a professor in college that wrote me a letter of recommendation. Let me read it. And at the end, he wrote, I am looking forward to the day that I can call Edgardo my colleague. And I reserved that one sentence as a way of evaluating the student, only for the students that I think are going to at some point end up being my boss. Oh, so then if you want personal information or personal knowledge of the student that you might have, but that the student did not ask you to include, you shouldn't be talking about information that is irrelevant to the career. If the student is applying for a PhD in divinity, yeah, you can talk about their service in churches or their beliefs. But if they're applying to medical school, talking about those particular, their political affiliation or their political feelings or their age or their marriage status, gender, it's not relevant to their future performance as the professional. And then overhyping the student, even though you're going to feel the student really deserves it, he has overcome so much. Overhyping is never good because it might come back to bite you or bite us in general. If you overhype a student that then goes and then fails out of graduate school or fails out of medical school, then they're going to say, oh, well, this is the best they can send. We're not going to pay attention to that school. So being honest and using this opportunity to talk about the struggle the student went through, it's okay, but only when you can put it in the context of the student achieved this, demonstrating A, B, or C quality that is important to the profession. And then the one that we get asked a lot about is, how about when I get a student that I don't really know and I don't feel that much about it? You certainly don't have to. If you don't know the student, if you don't think you can write them a strong letter of recommendation, that is your line. I thank you for asking me, but I don't feel that I know you that well to be able to provide a strong letter of recommendation. I know that a weak one or generic one will hurt you more. How about we think through it and try to identify other faculty here that might be better. Let me talk to you and tell you what are the qualities that you want in a recommender. Use this as an opportunity, as a teachable moment. If at one point, and I've gotten them, oh, but I have no one else. The onus is on the student. They should be, if they're planning to apply to something, they should be conscious about, I have to build the relationship so that I can get these letters of recommendation before. Most of our students don't know this. Half of our students have no one in their family or in their community that went to college or have gone to professional school. So they don't know this. It's not that they are lazy, it's that they just don't know that they're supposed to make sure that you know their name at the end of the semester. The professors should have at least one memory of you. They're not here in college only to learn something and take a test and pass the test. Thank you, no child left behind. That's the legacy that we have to deal with. But our students don't know that that's not just the only thing that they have to do here. So in any opportunity that you have, these when they ask you a letter of recommendation and you don't feel comfortable, that's a good moment to tell them and teach them that. But if you end up doing it, give the letter a positive tone. It's never good to send. It doesn't look good on you or the school, not just on the student, if you send a letter trashing the student. It's not good. For that, then just say no. But you can omit, in that case, what you don't say can also send messages. So you can omit the qualities for the profession requires that you don't think the student has, or you don't know if the student has, or you can also recommend with concerns. Although the student has performed very well in my course, the writing skills are not to the level that of my senior students, but I'm sure with the education you will give them, he will become an excellent X or Y. And then it's okay to mention negative qualities if you, again, give them a positive spin, like these qualities have room for improvement. The student has developed to a level that you will be able to build upon. They have made some progress on this, and just leaving it at that.
And then, I would just add to be mindful of the adjective you use. So you can say someone's a solid writer. That sends a different message than when you say someone is an excellent writer. We use that a lot, or we see that a lot, solid. Because you're sending a message, they're fine, but they're not maybe, they don't excel in that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, a short letter of less than a page sends a strong signal. If it's just a paragraph, that shows that maybe you didn't have a lot to say. And maybe that's true, but that sends a message to the reader. The best letters are usually about 2 pages, but don't force it. If you don't have anything to say, or if you don't have something to say beyond the paragraph, let the student know. Say, this is what I have to share about you, and I'm happy to do it. But if you have someone else who knows you better, you might want to ask them. Because sometimes students do, like Ed was saying, they do sort of see it as a check. I need this as part of my application, and they're asking people who may not know them well. So don't be shy about sharing with the student what you'll say.
Okay, so now we would like to hear from you. If you have questions, if there's anything that you'd like to discuss.
So you mentioned about students that you know well. What do you qualify as knowing well? Usually they've only been in my class for a semester, and I teach mainly online, so they're my online students. I've never met them. I only know them through their work.
Right.
How do I gauge, like, is this a sufficient, do I have sufficient knowledge to write a letter?
That's a good question. And you may not know them well enough in that circumstance. Generally, I would say for people that sometimes we do write letters of recommendation in my office, they're people that we see in our office a lot. They come to ask questions. We know their faces in the hall and their names, and we're not having to go, what's your name? We know what they're doing in their free time. If they're working or involved in X, Y, and Z, or if they're in the honors program or another program on campus. And they come see us a lot and ask about the assignments or something like that. But you know best what if you would be comfortable writing a letter of recommendation for someone and you have something to say, I think that's well enough.
Because I've written letters before and they're not 2 pages. I give them the grade. I mentioned their grade in the class. I don't think of it in terms of like top 1 or top 2%. I mentioned the type, the quality of the work they've done. Typically, they're applying to grad school, so I think the qualities for graduates, what makes for a successful student in graduate school. I asked for their, I'm just wondering, like, how much more do I include?
It sounds like you're doing it well. Yeah.
You can include what the information that you have. Something that I do with the pre-med students, I'll talk a little bit about the process, but for every pre-med student that applies to medical school, they have the option of getting a package letter, which is a letter from me on behalf of the college that puts the student in the context of basically the whole college. And because there's so few students and I have so many, I deal with 3 different cohorts of students. Pre-meds are the smallest group that I barely get to see or work really as much as I should if I had did this full time. What I did is I created a list of questions about why are you pursuing this career? What do you know about the career? And what are the top 3 qualities that you believe a professional in this field has? And then I have several questions, particularly for each one of the professions, be that medicine, podiatry, optometry, that I give the student, I tell them, okay, I'm gonna send you about 15 questions. You want the letter, you have to send me back the answer to at least 7, and they have to be more than 1 sentence, so that I know what to write about. It's not necessarily that I use that to create the letter, but that gives me a sense of how to write about the history of the student when beyond their grades and the help of figuring out what classes to take. I mean, there's no way that I can we don't have the facilities to teach them clinical skills or more medical health related skills here at John Jay, so I cannot talk about that. So I put it on them to teach me about themselves so that then I can use that to create a letter. So that might be something that you want to do, is just have them explain to you either over the phone or over email, why do you want to do this? And maybe the things that you feel that you need to know in order to give them a letter of recommendation.
Yeah, I usually ask for a brief personal statement, but I don't feel like I know them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I don't know what is meant to. How do you judge like who do you write for and who do you not write for? You know, I mean, typically if they didn't do well in my class, they don't ask. But if they're kind of middle of the road, I don't turn anybody away because I like to help.
Right.
But I also don't want to send in a letter that doesn't get, that doesn't have any weight.
You know, I would say, if you would see a colleague at a conference, somebody that you submitted a letter for, I mean, the reader of the letter, and they accepted your student, would you be comfortable speaking to that person about the student you wrote about? So let's say you wrote a letter about Linda and you sent it to John. Would you be comfortable talking to John and say, oh, Linda is great about X, Y, and Z, and not, oh, I don't know who that is. Yeah.
I don't see any of them. I only know them, via what they submit over time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
Sounds like you're doing it well, though.
yeah, anything for online, it does have those difficulties. I think what I would say is, you have a sixth sense for this. You know which students should get them. You know which ones shouldn't. You know which students have impressed you. You know which students have done just what they needed to do, and you know which students didn't even care. You can tell that from their assignments and the way that they approach you and approach the class.
And it's okay to say no
Yeah.
to a recommendation request, or at least share with the student, this is what I can say. If this is not enough, you are welcome to ask.
Yeah, I can only speak to what I know of their
Yeah.
performance in the class, but I don't know them as people. You know what I mean? Yeah. I just can't put anything beyond like 3/4 of the page versus 2 pages.
You can, I'm sorry, you can also include that in the letter. I taught this class online, and although I didn't have as much one-on-one contact with the students from my interactions with them, I learned blah, blah, blah.
Well, I think it's going to become more and more of an issue with online students, but that fortunately for me hasn't yet been an issue. This is becoming more of an issue. The first couple of years where I was asked, I guess I was lucky because I was asked by students that I had for more than one semester, who made sure I knew who they were. They didn't just pop up like, who is that person 2 years later? But I'm getting more of that lately. Just in the last week, I literally got an email from a student that I finished with a year ago, had in one semester, and had a lot of problems with him. And even in his email, and the reason it triggered was the email was very poorly written. Like didn't capitalize the letter I, used the wrong word. He meant what, but it said thought. So it really triggered. I'm like, oh yeah, this guy was a terrible writer. Even though he ended up doing well in the class because he did well on these. So I immediately sent back to him. I said, hi, glad to hear you're interested in graduate school, but to be honest, I have a lot of concerns about your writing skills. And then I picked up an email where he was saying, oh, I handed in the wrong paper and I put the wrong one to turn it in. You open a new portal. So I sent that back to him and I said, remember this fiasco? And then the final paper, you got less than 50% of the points. So graduate school is a lot of writing. So like I said, listen, if you really want me to think about this, send me an unofficial transcript and your resume and let me see how you did in other classes, but you may want to start thinking about other people. I guess I should have just said, go away, because that would have been easier. But I can't imagine that he has professors that he would be much more impressive to, or he wouldn't have asked me. So I don't know. So I'm getting more of these, I guess maybe I should be less reluctant to turn it down, because I am concerned that a graduate school will say, well, why did you recommend this person? They're incoherent. I mean, law school obviously is a lot of writing, but graduate school is a lot of research. I mean, that's the person's weakest part is doing research. So,
I I like
And I
the
get
answer
a
you
lot of
gave him.
experience with just having to flat out say, listen, there's nothing, I can say some nice things about you, but I have to mention this weak spot, which is a very significant weak spot, the kind of graduate work you want to do.
And I think you did exactly what you should have. As I mentioned at the beginning, writing letters of recommendation is part of our job, but that doesn't mean that we have to write every letter of recommendation we are asked for. We are in part, and I know this word, particularly when it comes to professional postgraduate school, gets a lot of bad, but we are in part gatekeepers of our professions. We are experts in our field. We know what it takes, and regardless, there are some students that they might have amazing capabilities on other fields, but do not have the particular magic, for other lack of a better word, that is required to practice law, medicine, science, psychology. You know this, and you can use that then to determine if the student should get a letter of recommendation from you. It is their job to impress their recommenders so that they have recommenders, not ours.
Well, I think something you brought up, I think is important, and I'm going to start adopting it, I think, which is the students don't seem to have any idea that this is coming, and they need to develop a relationship with somebody. So, I remember when I started teaching at John Jay 4 years ago, they said, listen, you might be the only lawyer they've actually spoken to. There's nobody in their neighborhood, there's nobody in their family. Like the fact that you put yourself through night school, you'll be like a hero, because they never heard of anybody like that. Well, you're right. I think that they don't know. So you end up getting these emails 2 years later, you don't remember the person. So maybe toward the end of the last day of the semester, it's probably worth mentioning, listen, if any of you guys are thinking of going on to X, Y, or Z, don't be a stranger, because I'm not going to remember who you are a year from now. Like, say hello once in a while, drop into office hour, drop me an email with how your progress is, because I just don't think they know. They don't think there's anything weird about waiting 2 years and then asking somebody that you knew for 1 semester to write a letter of recommendation.
Right. No, I agree with you, telling them, come see me, follow up with me. There's some professors who actually have policies for writing letters of recommendation. So they say, if I taught you, you have to take 2 classes with me, or you have to come to office hours, you have to follow up with me once a semester. And if you don't do that, I can say no.
Because the kids are doing very well are not the ones who tend to always come to me during office hours. I've had one kid come in and say, well, I'm thinking of going to this graduate program. What do you think? Do you think I can do it? Well, one.
Did you think that was a valuable conversation?
Yes.
Okay. We tell them to do that all the time.
But one person.
Wow.
So, other than that, it's like they get to the end of the 4th year and they go, what am I going to do with my life? Oh, I guess I'll apply to law school. So it's the first time they've ever thought of it, it seems.
Mhm.
That's what I'm saying. Do they know about the pre-law institute? Because a lot of them that have weird ideas about that, and I've said, have you been in the pre-law institute? They're like, no, I just found out about it and they're graduating.
Right.
Well, that's unfortunate.
And maybe they need to take some time to figure out whether it's really for them. Because being a lawyer, there's so many unhappy lawyers. So we really encourage them to go work in a law firm, be a paralegal, be a legal assistant, to make sure that they love it.
This is one follow-up on what I said here. It's very important to give our students somewhat of a context in terms of what these professions involve, because they're not getting it at home. You said they may never have been a lawyer, never been a mathematician or a scientist, and it's something I think college has to spend a lot more, invest a lot more in doing. So that the students don't wait till the 4th year and they start developing that kind of perspective so they can make intelligent career choices. And as far as the takeaway from the letter, one point that's very important. Whoever's reading them is to read a lot of them. So it should be kept short and sweet, no more than 1 8.5 by 11 page, excluding the letter. And the second point, I know mathematics and computer science department, usually the student who wants to go on to a PhD in major. They didn't come to John Jay thinking they were going to major, maybe in forensic science, maybe in computer science, maybe in mathematics, not so strongly, but to go to graduate school and look forward to another 5 years of toil. Something like that. They became interested in some special facet of the field, whatever. They developed a close relationship. Got to put that distinguishing event in the letter. That usually seals the deal because it sets them apart. So those are the two things that I find. You got to get in every letter. All the other things that you said, introduce yourself, how has the student done? Well, how has the student done this transcript? But it's those distinguishing events.
Right.
That's what makes them special and shows they have what it takes.
And you're right about discussing specifically how the student, you're right when it comes to discussing how the student did academically, as in they got an A, they got a B. You don't have to do that. That's what the transcript is for. What I meant is put them in context. There are other schools, Harvard, that give A's like if they were, candy, and that they inflate. As a policy, they inflate sometimes their grading. Personally, we don't do that. Particularly in science, me sending a student with a 3.5 from a science major is like sending a 4.0 from an Ivy League. So being able to put them in context, the student might have a 3.5, but among their peers, a 3.5 means top 10% of the class instead of top 15% of the class. Okay?
What you said is just very true.
Yes.
STEM disciplines tend to be much more demanding.
So we have 10 minutes, and we're just going to go quickly over the particularities of the two types of professions that we work with.
All right, can I ask a question really quick?
Sure.
Can you go back 2 slides with your letter of recommendation?
Yeah.
Your letter, that letter right there. How much of that letter is cut and paste? And how much of that, is that letter like original and unique to each student?
I would say it's 50-50.
Okay.
Like the first paragraph telling who I am, it's there's no way for me to, there's so many ways that I can write my name is this and I am this. How I meet the students, I have generally 2 narratives because I either meet the students because they're part of Present or they're pre-meds. So I talk, if they're pre-meds, I talk about, I met them X number of years ago. We have discussed our career. If I have a memory of a particular good question or a particular thing, I include it there. If they're part of Present, I talk about how they're in that paragraph about why did I select them to be part of that program and what I believe makes them a good, are going to make it, what qualities they have that will make them a good scientist. For then, in the case of these particular students, it was in my class, so I have 2 qualities that are very important to a scientist, that I believe are very important to a scientist. One is being able to contextualize results in the big picture. So if the student has demonstrated that, I kind of have a paragraph already talking about that. I change the names. I might change if I have a memory or a particular, then I include that. If not, if I don't have a particular memory, I just don't I mention it, but I might not put the example.
I just want to get an idea more or less. Thank you.
Okay, so so medical students, like law students, apply to centralized application systems. Those are becoming more and more common among postgraduate programs. For medicine, is going to be AMCAS for MD, ACOMAS for DO, which is another way to practice medicine in the United States. And then there's the Texas system because Texas City, they have their own system for their schools. So that means that you will either, in the case of pre-med students, you're going to either be submitting directly to those portals or submitting to me for me to submit it on your behalf. Every school is going to have a different number and types of letters. Generally, they're going to ask for 3 to 4. Some of there's an extreme case that asks for 6. Some of them only want 2. And they're going to specify if they want X number of science faculty, X number of non-science faculty, research mentor, or someone that saw you in a clinical environment, someone that can talk about your community service. They will, each medical school will decide what they want to hear and will make it very obvious to the faculty, to the student. And in medicine, the title of field, the recommender can be as important as how well the the recommender knows the student. So if they say they will specify we want 2 letters from science faculty, and that means we want 2 letters from PhDs in STEM. There are 3 ways that pre-med students can ask for letters of recommendation. There's committee letter, package letter, or individual letter. We don't have a committee letter system at John Jay because A, is falling out of fashion, and B, I started, but then I stopped pretending that I was a committee. You cannot be a committee of 1. I'm the only pre-held anything in the college, so I moved to package letters. So package letter contains a cover letter that gives the ranking, and I think that opportunity I limit it to 1 page, and I include details that are important to the student narrative, but that have not been mentioned anywhere else in the application because they get to see the whole thing. If the student have a problem when they were sick on a semester, I tell the student, don't talk about that, let me talk about it. I include a little paragraph about it. And then attached to that go all the other letters that each medical school requests that I have in my secure file that I don't know. Or they can just go to you and tell you, I'm applying to medical school and I want you to write me a letter. You get an email from AMCAS or from ACOMAS, and you just follow the link, upload it, and that's it. Then lastly, medical school want you to provide an assessment of the applicant's suitability for the profession. They don't want you to make the case of why the student deserves to be here. They want to hear the student has X, Y, and Z characteristics that are important for the profession. So focus on behaviors and skills that you have observed directly. You should also describe the relationship with the candidate. Then you can also focus on the core entry-level competencies, which is the next step. Medical schools have figured it out. The system is a lot easier. Can you pass it to the slide? And the AAMC, with American Association of Medical Colleges, came up with a system to tell recommenders or evaluators what to write about. Basically, it's described here, but if you ever get a pre-med student, let me know. This is all on our website and very well explained. But at least for medical school, they want to hear about this because they know that these are the characteristics that medical schools want to hear about.
Okay, so really quickly, law school. So like medical school, law schools are submitted to a centralized system, the LSAC, the Law School Admission Council. Everything is submitted on that website. So if you get a letter of recommendation request from somebody applying to law school, you're going to get an email, and then you can upload your letter to LSAC. Applicants must submit 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. We encourage them to get the majority from professors. And it can be a professor in any field. It doesn't have to be law related. It doesn't have to be a full professor. Adjuncts are wonderful writers. Law schools don't care. It's more how well you know the student. What can you say about them? Go to the next. What do law schools want to know? They want to know about communication skills because that's what lawyers do. So anything you can say about reading, writing, speaking. The student's critical thinking and logical reasoning skills are very important. So if you've observed that, which one do you have, you can speak about it. Does a student have leadership skills? This is not necessary, but if you've seen that in class or you've heard about the student doing something involving leadership, it's helpful. How does the student compare with other students? How would you assess the student's maturity? It's not necessary, but it's helpful for the law schools to see because a lot of people go directly from undergraduate to law school and they may not be ready, which is not something you have to say, but if you notice that the student is particularly mature and poised, you might put that. Has the student spoken to you about his or her plans to become a lawyer? Law schools really like to hear that. So if the student has mentioned to you, I want to do this, I want to help this community, you can mention it. Stories or examples are helpful. Just like we said before, it's reasonable to ask to see a student's resume, personal statement, transcripts, and other materials. You can ask the student to provide background information for you to share. And then we are available for feedback. We're happy to review letters of recommendation if you want to run them by us or if you have any questions. And you can always stop by. And we're at pli@jjy.edu.
Okay, and here's a couple of resources. The slides are going to be on the TLC website. For the sciences, particularly biomedical sciences, the Howard Hughes forget, medical institutes, put together this great book called Making the Right Moves, which are to set up, basically teaching scientists how to set up their careers in academia. And they have a great addendum that has a lot of general information for recommendation letters that go beyond biomedical sciences. The AAMC has the guidelines. You just look AAMC guidelines. It will give you everything you need for the medical school perspective. And then you have the one from the
Law School Admission Council, which you can browse. It has all of the information. Thank you.
Thank you. We forgot, do you have any questions?
Oh,
You said the slides are gonna be on the website.
Yeah, we always send them to Gina. If not, she can. I will send myself a reminder to send it to Gina.
So it's either all in one or